Sproule of Crowd Machine. Craig is going to be talking to us today about the true value of Bitcoin. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for coming along to this discussion. I'm the CEO and founder of Crowd Machine, and if you haven't heard about us in the past, I'm sure you will in the future. So I'm going to talk about the true value of Bitcoin, not from the sense of the cryptocurrency, but more from the point of view of what it's done for the industry and is going to do to the industry as we progress through time. I get a bit of grey hair. I've been around for a while, and what's really interesting in this audience, because I do a few of these speaking engagements, is the last one I was at, where were we, Kurt? We're in Santa Clara, right? And the age demographic is really different because Silicon Valley is full of kids that are into the blockchain space. So it's good to see some people with a little more maturity in the industry here to participate in the conferences. And what it's indicating to me is that there is a transition taking place in the industry as we move through time, where it's becoming more mainstream. And obviously there's a lot more investment at a sort of senior level that's taking place in the industry, which is good. All right. So Bitcoin needs blockchain, but blockchain doesn't need Bitcoin. It's not being disrespectful. It's pretty much a statement. And Bitcoin really started, a cryptocurrency revolution, and you're all here because of Satoshi. Whether Satoshi is a he or a she or a group or an it, we don't know. It's one of the big mysteries of the industry itself. But it's interesting to see that technology, that revolution, that innovation has actually created what you're participating in today. And it's, I was sitting there before reflecting on, in my career, the few events that have fundamentally changed the industry. And you can look at, like I was around at the dawn of the PC, before PCs had hard drives and all that sort of stuff. So that was for me a real revolutionary point that I was part of and lucky enough to experience. Then there was Tim Berners-Lee with the internet, and we all know that story. So there's sort of another point in time that has been very, very interesting. And you're at the third point, or in my career anyway, the third point in time, and some of you may have experienced some others, I don't know. And it's hard to know what the next one will be. It's likely to be something that pops out of AI. And certainly AI and blockchain are on a trajectory that's going to make a fundamental change to the industry. But the real value of Bitcoin is, what's going on behind the scenes with it. It's really demonstrated that decentralized computing is a thing. We've had things in the past like SETI and the rest of it, protein folding, decentralized type networks, which have been used, but now you're experiencing the dawn of decentralization. And it'll be really interesting to see what that does to centralized infrastructures going forward. Now, before I get into it, I will say that last September, I think it was, we ran a webinar. I had about 350 CIOs and VPs of engineering, etc., from enterprises, large enterprises in the US on that webinar, all listening tentatively to what blockchain was all about. We polled them after that webinar, and only 5 of those 350 were actually engaged in active blockchain projects at that point in time to look at what the technology could actually do. So what that's telling you is that we're still very much at the dawn of adoption of that type of technology into the enterprise, but it's happening very, very quickly. I was recently in Mauritius, and I met with 3 banks there, and every single one of those banks were looking at Ripple projects. So that's really, really interesting. So you can see Ripple starting to penetrate the banking industry, which is great. All right, so the other thing about that, before I move on, is that blockchain is going to disrupt everything that we know of in the technology industry in some way. It's going to have an impact, there's no doubt about it. Or not just the technology industry, vocations like accounting will change, for example. Everything will change. All right, so if we were to quantify the true value of blockchain, basically this slide is saying you can't. We don't know. It's impossible to understand what the socio-economic impacts are. Again, in a recent trip to Mauritius, you have a look at what's going on in the African nations, for example. Crypto is being used in different ways around the world for different things. And honestly, in the US, sometimes it feels like it's sort of lagging the rest of the world. And so the rest of the world is, and I'm obviously not from here originally, I get an Aussie accent, but I've been living here for a long time, and it feels like the US is sort of slower to adopt the change, and maybe that's a regulatory problem, I don't know, but certainly it feels like it's slower here than it is elsewhere in the world. So it's truly unfathomable. You can't work it out. I don't think we ever will, in terms of what Satoshi's work did or is going to do to the world as we understand it. Impossible to put a number on it today, regardless of what Gartner and the rest of them will tell you. In the Valley, for those of you who are over here from Silicon Valley, you will understand that there's a lot of money being invested in blockchain technology today, and you see it all the time. I've got a few listed up there right now that are taking, the interesting projects. Some of them are complete, some of them are still evolving. The interesting thing about them is that fundamentally they all perform the same basic function. So if you look at markets and as they evolve, not all of them can survive doing the same thing. And there have been many examples through the course of technology's history that demonstrates that. And you're seeing it already. What is going to happen is that these blockchains are going to verticalize to sustain themselves with time. So you'll see things like verticalization into banking, like Ripple. You'll see verticalization in the health sector, security title, whatever it is. There's going to be verticalization take place with blockchains because they can't all do the same thing and exist. They'll be forced to verticalize. So blockchain's going to be very pervasive. It's already started. But a blockchain is just a blockchain. So it's a little like a car, right? I could have the best motor, the fastest motor I can get. Not that blockchains are like that yet, but in the absence of a chassis and a drive chain and a wheels and the rest of it, a blockchain serves no purpose, just like a motor serves no purpose in the absence of the gear to run it on. So you really need an application to drive a blockchain. And again, if you look at the course of time, relational database engines were great things, but it was applications that actually sold database engines. It wasn't the database engine itself, per se. So applications at the end of the day are largely responsible for the success or otherwise of a utility-based technology, and blockchain is really no different to that. So it implies that longer term, given that we're going to see verticalization take place of blockchains, that building an application on a single blockchain is probably not going to be the case. You'll use a blockchain, you'll create an application that uses a blockchain for, say, authentication. It may then do some sort of title transfer based upon the application type. So you'll be calling multiple different blockchains to perform function. And there'll be one or two survivors that are generic in nature. Ethereum may survive as the generic blockchain, but you'll still utilize other blockchains to perform specific function because they'll be specialized into that particular area. And again, I'm no seer. I'm not sort of up here with a crystal ball or anything else. All I'm doing is looking back at history and what's taken place in the industry in the past and sort of applying those same basic principles to the technology moving forward. But with verticalization, you get increase in risk. And the reason for that is that, well, first of all, when you verticalize, you accelerate and decelerate the application creation process. You accelerate it from the basis of there is inherent functionality built into the underpinning technology that removes the need to build that same functionality in the application itself. But at the same time, because you're using multiple blockchains, you're having to learn multiple different technologies now to actually create your application. And with that comes risk, because if I'm a developer and I have to write a smart contract for blockchain A and I have to write a smart contract for blockchain B, and they're two different techniques, then if I have to learn that technology, right? And as you saw with the DAO, a simple mistake can be very, very costly. So the more technologies that you have as a developer to understand, and I can tell you from personal experience, I spent many, many years writing code. And the first time you actually write an application with a new language, a year or 18 months into it, you go back and look at what you started with, and you look at it and go, I could have written that better, right? You make mistakes, you learn as you go with a language. The same principle applies with blockchain or anything else that you're working with. So there's a learning curve. If you've got to learn multiple technologies, it increases the risk of making a mistake along the way and it biting you. But technology abstraction reduces the risk. So risk mitigation and market demand drives technology abstraction. And again, if you were to look at the relational database market over the course of time, that's basically been the same principle that's applied. Once upon a time, for those of you that were around at the time, we used to open files, we'd put data in the file, we'd read data from the file, close the file, and then I think it was Cod and Date from IBM proposed the concept of relational technology. Oracle built one, and now we don't do so much of that anymore, right? We make calls to a service that actually performs the function for us. So abstraction takes away a lot of the risk as you go. And we're already seeing it in blockchain with things like Ether Party, where they're automating the smart contract development process. It's already happening. Blockchains will evolve to support interoperability as well. They really don't have a choice. It will happen, and there's already an alliance that started to support it. So it's definitely a thing that's going to happen over time. So applications dictate the pace of market development. So basically that means that there's the pace at which applications can be created to consume blockchains will dictate the pace of blockchain adoption into the marketplace. I don't think it's any rocket science there. It's just going to take time to build those apps, and over time you're going to see this decentralization phenomenon erode the current centralized app stack that exists today. And market demand will continue to drive the automation of the tech. So a little bit about us. I've rushed through it maybe a little bit fast. But Crowd Machine, and this is our pitch at the end, sorry to bore you with it. Crowd Machine really consists of three things. And we've been around for a while working on this technology, so there's a customer list, or a small customer list there on the screen. So we've been developing a tech that has completely, and I mean it, removed the need for software programming in the creation of applications. And all of those customers up there today are using the tech to do exactly that. We have focused on democratizing the app development process by creating some very sophisticated technology that sort of automates the engineering aspects of app design. The other thing that we're working on is a thing called the Crowd Computer. And everybody in here who've got your mobile phone out, ultimately will be able to onboard your mobile device onto the network, and it will participate as a processor set on the actual network. So, and you'll be monetized for that, so you're rewarded for that device participation. Bunch of Fortune 500 companies using it today. And the other thing that's in there that I didn't mention was CrowdShare. CrowdShare is a lot like GitHub, but a little bit different. We don't actually write code in our world. We create capability. And what we're doing is working with educational facilities around the world to get students involved in the product. We're very, very focused on community as a company. And what that community will be able to do is upload functionality, and every time that functionality runs on the network, they'll be rewarded for its consumption. So that's how CrowdShare works. The Crowd Computer, it's currently in development It'll be available at the end of the year. It's a different way of thinking about things, but basically just think about it as AWS distributed around the planet, and the Crowd App Studio is an environment that allows you to create applications on that actual network. So, you know, right now, we're the real deal. So the Crowd App Studio, as I mentioned, it removes the need to write code. It's about 45 times faster to create an app. You don't need to depend on engineering resources at all. And, you know, the customers that I mentioned, they're currently using all sorts of resources in their organisation to. Having trouble with my voice. They're using all sorts of resources inside their organisation to actually build apps today. So they're not your traditional software engineers. They're all sorts of different people. And Crowdsure I mentioned a moment ago, so I think you've got a good handle on that. And with that, I'll leave it for questions. We got time? Good. So what are some examples of the apps? There's a lot of IoT applications that are running on it. Big banking systems are running on it. Case management systems. What else have we got? Storefront. HR. Yeah, there's a bunch of different applications that are using the technology today. And the banking system, for example, is a really good use case for it, or case study. That's a mission-critical system. It's managing billions in loans. So it's running 24/7, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of transactions a day rolling through it. That's a long story. And I need a whiteboard. So how does the natural language expression inside of Crowd Machine actually create an application? It's only part of it, but we don't generate code. So Crowd Machine is not a code generator. Think of the easiest way to understand it is it's a little bit like a 3D printer, whereby I provide the engine a set of instructions. The engine understands what those instructions are and creates the application. But we don't do it through code gen. The only code that ever gets generated out of the product in real time is something that will be served up in the form of HTML. All right. So the engine, you feed it blueprints. It interprets the blueprints and performs the function that's described in the blueprints. The natural language expressions, fundamentally, it's actually an expert system. So what it does, it will take a natural expression and resolve it out, and behind the scenes it turns it into code fragments in memory that you never see, and it executes those. But it's clever in that it poses questions based on a number of different things that are taking place that you're working on at that point in time. So it's a long, long story, right? And the best way to understand it is jump on and look at one of the webinars, or have a demo, or join up for the public beta. I didn't mention that the tech we've had in enterprise for quite some time, but we've just started releasing it to the public right now. So jump on the website, get on the newsletter. If you're interested, get into the beta, do the tutorials, and you'll understand how it sort of falls into place.
You mentioned capabilities are part of the platform. So can anybody provide capabilities? And I'm assuming those are coded.
Yes, anybody can provide capabilities, and no, they're not coded. So you can define a behavior, a set of instructions that tell the platform or the network how to perform, and you put, we call those patterns, a pattern of behavior, and you put the pattern of behavior up in the repository, share it, And every time that thing gets run anywhere on the network, so say for example I created a predictive algorithm for weather based upon a set of factors, and I put it into CrowdShare, and then somebody elsewhere is building an application, say for agriculture or whatever else. They see this thing, they include it into their application, and whenever that thing gets run anywhere on the network for perpetuity, that person is going to be rewarded for their contribution. And it handles derivative works through the chain as well. Hang on, I've got to go up here. The token incentivization? Okay, I can explain that. We are a true utility token. There are three utilizations of the token. The first one is if you've onboarded your device to the network, then every time your device is used to participate on the network, you'll be rewarded with a token. That's the first incentivization process. Second incentivization process is the one that I just mentioned around enabling people to create capability and put it into CrowdShare and then consume that capability, so that they're rewarded in tokens as well. The way that we make money as Crowd Machine is that you get to build for free, you get to test for free on the network, and when you deploy to production, you pay for the compute consumption. And there's nobody in here probably old enough to remember, but there was a thing called MIPS once upon a time, which was millions of instructions per second. Fundamentally, our model is exactly the same as that. It's not that dissimilar to the way that you have to pay gas to run an Ethereum smart contract. It's the same basic principle. So the token is absolutely critical to our actual model. Our private sale is absolutely rocking. We've finished out our first tranche, and it's all public knowledge. You can see it on the web. We have 3 tranches of 20 million apiece. We kicked it off a week and a bit ago, and it runs through the private sale to the 20th of April. On the 1st of April, we kick off a public sale, so it runs in parallel for the last 20 days. The reason why we're doing that is to try and balance our actual token price with a market price. And at the end of, on the 20th of April, we close the initial sales cycle, and we take whatever we've raised, apply it to 125 million tokens, and you have a fundamental token price for market. And that's sort of how the model works, but it's going very, very well. Pretty happy with it. Yeah, it's interesting because traditionally enterprises wouldn't have deployed on, AWS, for example. But our biggest customer is Anthem Health Insurance, right? And so we actually have a lot of PHI running in the system. That's all at AWS. So you are seeing a migration of enterprise to cloud, and not just their own cloud, to public cloud. So there is a willingness to do that. However, I can't tell you how painful the process was with Amazon to go through their security audit. It was a 6-month ordeal, is the only way to describe it. But we're proving that companies such as that are willing to embrace that model, assuming that there's a cost justification for doing so. And we do believe that decentralization will offer the same alternatives over time. One of the nice things about Bitcoin is that it hasn't been hacked, and as such, it's proving that it can be done in a secure way. So, I wake up every day waiting to see whether Bitcoin's been hacked, because if it is, that causes us a problem. But I don't think it's going to. And you're seeing corporations embracing that as a new model. It's definitely happening. Are we done? Okay, we're around. Yeah, so if anybody else has any questions, then give us a yell and grab Laurel up the back, and she'll track us down. Thanks, everybody.